Hi BookTube, it's Amy. So I got back into Honoré de Balzac this week. I read his story, The Vendetta, from volume 1 of my set. As I've mentioned before, unfortunately the translator for the stories within my set is not listed, and it appears to be an amalgamation of various translations and various prefaces. So The Vendetta was published in 1930. The story itself is set beginning in 1800 and likely picking up about the time when Balzac would have published it. So late 1820s, about 1830. And we get a brief scene in 1800 at the beginning of the story where Piombo, who is described as being from Corsica, as having Italian heritage, arrives in Paris looking for help from an old friend. He explains that he has just carried out a vendetta against a family who killed his son and burned his farm, and he has gotten back at them by killing everyone in the family. And he thinks he got them all, with the exception of a 6-year-old boy by the name of Luigi. Now, setting that aside, suddenly we find ourselves in an artist studio. So Severa is an accomplished artist, and he is the go-to art teacher for young ladies in Paris, especially those of the aristocracy. And there's this very interesting scene where Balzac describes the social microcosm that appears in this art studio, in this classroom. It really is mirroring their parents' politics within the artist studio. So you have, first of all, you have the aristocracy. So the people with titles, the young ladies who only associate with each other. And then you have sort of the merchant class, so the daughters of the merchants and businessmen who are very wealthy, but their parents don't have titles. And so therefore, within the studio, even though they're taking the art lessons together and painting together, they do not mix. They are two separate social groups. And Genvera is a part of the aristocratic social group, and she is there, to use a modern term, she is their queen bee. Balzac describes the other young ladies as following her as soldiers followed Napoleon. And that's an interesting point because it brings us to another microcosm, another aspect of this microcosm. You have the royalists and the Bonapartists. And so recently, the royalists have returned to power and Napoleon has lost power. Genvera's father is still, in a position of power. He's not extremely wealthy. He's not as high up in the ranks as he was in Napoleon's day. But for the most part, he's doing all right. Nobody is accusing him of anything. No one is coming to kill him. But he still harbors Bonapartist sympathies. He is still very much against the royalists, against monarchy. And he has instilled these values in his daughter. And the other girls who are in her circle, so the aristocratic girls, are from royalist families. Everyone has sort of gone back to the side of royalists, of the royalty, if they weren't there already. And so even though they really love Genvera, they decide that they are going to ostracize her from their social group. And you have this very tense scene where she comes into class and they are giving her the silent treatment. They are not speaking to her, but she seems absolutely oblivious because really she has other things on her mind. She is wondering about the young man who she caught a glimpse of through the closet door in the corner, which seems bizarre, but she is adjusting her easel, pretending to adjust the blinds to get better light on what she's painting, while trying to sneak a glimpse into the closet. And she has discovered through her little glimpse in that there is a young man lying in there on a cot, hiding out, and that he has Bonapartist military insignia on his uniform. And so she supposes that he is a young man, a soldier who has fled the military at the end of this conflict and is fearing for his life because he was not on the side of the royalists who won in this conflict. And she eventually lets Severa, her art teacher, know that, I know there's a young man in your closet. And he says, well, it's good you were the one who saw because I can trust you. I know who you are. I know where your father's sympathies lie. And she almost immediately falls in love with this young man. He comes out of this closet and his name is Luigi. His name is Luigi Porta. Almost immediately, they start calling him Louis. I would assume that maybe that's the francophone, the French version of his name, Luigi, because he is Italian. And Genevera herself is referred to on and off throughout the story as the Italian. So this is a group of people with Italian roots living in France. And I'm not sure of the complexities of the borders between French and Italy. They're described as being from Corsica, but I look up Corsica and Corsica seems to be a place in France. So forgive me if I'm a little bit confused about what these Italian people are doing in Paris. I'm sure there's a very logical explanation, but I'm just missing some of the historical context here. So she almost immediately falls in love with this young man by the name of Luigi, despite saying that she would never love anyone other than her father and that she had no plans to marry. And Balzac, I've noticed in these early stories, he's very into describing artists and the work of artists and describing how artists see the world. And so he writes this passage where Genevera is looking at him as she would an art object, as she would something she is going to paint, and the light falls in such a way that she sees him as a celestial being. And so he's absolutely, an angel, like a god to her. And immediately she offers assistance. She says, my father, he has this influence, we've got this money, I can help you. We can, get you pardoned and get you back into life. And she finds out that he was fighting in this conflict at the side of Labradore, who I guess was someone quite important. And so she goes home, and her father has been beginning to suspect that she's got some sort of surprise on the roll. Maybe she's painting some picture for him because she's been staying late at the art studio for several weeks. She goes home to her father and she says, I have fallen in love. There's a man I want to marry. And they immediately have this over dramatic scene. In fact, the one scene in this story that I didn't actually like just because it seemed so absurd, where, he's saying, you'll never marry, I'll never let you marry, how can you leave me, don't you love me? And she goes sort of dramatic down on her knees, like, do you want to kill me, you're killing me. And it's just not sort of the scene you would expect between a loving father and daughter. Certainly it got blown out of proportion very quickly, and he does agree, you can marry, I'm going to let you marry, it'll make you happy. Until he meets Luigi, and it turns out Luigi is the 6-year-old boy that escaped when her father tried to massacre his whole family because of this vendetta years before. And her father just cannot let things go and says that he cannot possibly allow her to marry this man. In fact, he wants to fulfill this vendetta, despite, when arriving in Paris, promising his friend that the vendetta was over. And so we've got this very, almost a Romeo and Juliet thing going on, this forbidden love. And I won't tell you how it ends, but it really, gracious, what was that? Construction. That was quite a loud loud bang there, but I don't even know if that was picked up on camera, but it shook my apartment. So we've got this Romeo and Juliet thing going on, and she is determined to marry Luigi no matter what. So overall, I did like the story, except for those overdramatic scenes between her and her father. I like how Balzac brings humor into it. There's one line in particular I liked where Severin, who is the one who owns the art studio, because Genevera has been having these, late afternoon, evening rendezvous with the guy in the closet, this rumor has spread among the other girls in the studio that the art teacher is facilitating this rendezvous between Genevera and a young man, which scandalizes the families of these young women, and they pull their daughters out of the art school. And he sort of passes it off, and he says, you've actually sort of done me a favor, I'll be okay. Why, as soon as it's known that I've sheltered a fugitive, all the liberals in Paris will send me their daughters. Which is a pretty funny joke, but obviously it doesn't work out that way. In fact, he ends up losing his business and having to rely entirely on the proceeds from his own artwork, and his wife is quite mad about that. But often some of Balzac's characters will have funny little lines like that. So overall, a good story, very entertaining, despite the sort of overdramatic scenes between her and her father. But I think this was probably my favorite that I've read in this collection so far. Next, I will be reading Madame Firmiani, which is dedicated to my dear Alexander de Berny from his old friend de Balzac. So if you've read this one, do let me know in the comments below what you thought of it, and I hope you're having a fantastic Saturday.